Let's start with the spectrum of narcissistic pathology, which goes all the way from normal narcissism. Everybody has normal narcissistic needs and aspirations, and the capacity to regulate those and realize those. There's a certain amount of narcissism and ambition, for example. Desire for mastery, the desire to shine, the desire to be recognized by one's colleagues and friends and partners, et cetera, et cetera. All of those are narcissistic needs. And then there are narcissistic traits, right? And so people can have narcissistic traits in certain situations, given certain things happen to them in their life. They're getting a lot of attention. They've gotten an award or whatever. People can have transient sort of narcissistic states depending on what's going on in their life. And they can have some narcissistic traits without having the full-blown personality syndrome. There are also different character traits, like individuals who are more or less masochistic or histrionic or self-defeating or any number of other traits that also complicate the way narcissistic pathology presents itself. But we don't have to go into all of that. But there's a gradation. So you have, on the one hand, normal narcissism and narcissistic strivings. Then you have individuals with narcissistic traits, of which in our society, there are many. The rise in narcissistic traits in the general population has been documented in many studies. I don't know if you're familiar with the studies that were done of college students. Since 1980, in 1980, there was normal college students, there were celebrities who had very high rates of narcissism. Now college students have rates of narcissism and narcissistic traits comparable to celebrities. Everyone's their own celebrity. Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, Instagram. Now that doesn't mean everyone has narcissistic pathology. You see what I'm saying? We get into pathology, in my opinion, when we get into changes in structure, internal structure. And that's why I describe the pathological grandiose self. That is, I think, a defensive formation, probably starting in childhood and maybe even in early childhood, where the ideal aspects of self and other outstrip the realistic self. And that skews the whole personality. I don't think about NPD according to the DSM. I think about it as an inability to regulate one's normal narcissistic needs and therefore taking on defensive grandiosity or withdrawing into a kind of defensive, vulnerable narcissistic state of being preoccupied with fantasy. And I think one presentation may be dominant depending on how well the person's defenses work. There are different presentations of narcissism. I see vulnerable narcissists are those whose grandiose defenses are not working so well. A sense that their life has been a series of extreme maltreatment. There's nothing anybody can ever do to ameliorate their misery, that they're unique in their suffering. And this actually is a presentation that is actually almost designed to defeat the clinician. And the sense of specialness of the individual is really in the specialness of their suffering. And that's an example of how vulnerable narcissism can present itself. There's a whole spectrum of narcissism.